Idea Factory is now a showcase for the CREE initiative. Last time we had our first talk 2 months ago. It was Dr. Sabrina Collins. She gave a fantastic talk about strategies she's using to better mentor her students, to involve them in scientific writing research. Today, we're going to have a student, we're going to have the other side telling us about his experience with CREE courses and how CREE courses affected him as a student. Welcome, Xamaka.
Thank you.
The podium is up.
Thank you. So, to start the slide, okay. All right, greetings. My name is Xamaka LaTham, and I am a pre-med biobehavioral psychology student here at LTU, as some of you might know. And I'm here to give you my take on how my CREE experience has helped me in the classroom and outside of the classroom setting. So, the main concept of this talk is to explain how CREE improves the levels of student exposure in research and aids in curriculum comprehension. It exposes all students to the scientific method as an experience-based set of skills. And to me, that's the most key concept of CREE, is the fact that it is, in fact, experience-based. Because when you're going into the work world, they're not asking you, what class did you take specifically? They're asking you, what experience do you have? So, and it's an honor to be here and speaking with all of you here at the Idea Factory. I've been to many talks here, so it's nice to be on the other side. So without further ado, 2 years ago, I would read articles and watch scientists explain their findings on different networks such as TED Talks or World Economic Forums or Singularity University, and I would think, how would I get there? How does someone get to that point? I would dream of writing research papers and being an explorer of the everyday phenomenon, but they're giants in terms of science. They are light years ahead of where I was starting in terms of my education. So, and this is where it comes down to this woman right here, where she was someone that I admired as a scientist. Her name is Neri Oxman, and she directs the Mediated Matter Research Group at MIT, and she focuses on experiential research and how to combine interdisciplinary skills together to form solutions for everyday problems. So I started thinking, how can I get to that point? Instead of just watching her on a TV screen amongst all other researchers. So the only problem that I would come around was, how does someone that doesn't come from an academically inclined family history, get brought up to speed? And the idea of entering the research field for most students, in my case, it's a very daunting task, and especially if you don't know where to start or who to talk to. So, when studying the scientific method in a textbook, I understood, okay, this is how you do it in the step-by-step. You have to start with a hypothesis. You then start understanding what your variables are, and you take it from there. However, I had trouble with structuring my thoughts and actually pacing myself in the process. I kept rushing to the last idea, rushing to whatever explanation I would find. So I needed to figure out a way to ground myself in the work that I was doing. Because I always had many ideas running through my brain, and I always wanted to make sure the experiment was perfect, almost too perfect, to a fault where it would stop me from wanting to start it in the first place, because I didn't know how it would end up. So, in order to structure my thoughts, I did what any other college student would do, and I registered for a class of the topic. And actually, the way that I came about this course was the first Idea Factory I went to. And it was presented by Franco Delogu, and it was about Mora. And it was in watching this that I realized that we do have a very we do have courses that are set to teaching students this way. And I saw the class on my flowchart, but I was gonna hold it off because I didn't know what was coming about with it. So once I saw this talk and I got this experience, or this view of what's happening at LTU, I decided to register in the class for the next semester. Oops, sorry. So in this class, I joined the research methods class. And in this class, we didn't just study the process of observing or how to formulate a hypothesis or how to analyze existing information, collect data, and interpret that data. We did it physically, live and in color. And it was a very enriching process, and I was able to really feel included in the whole process of research without it feeling like a daunting task of me reading a book and trying to figure out how I'm going to interpret what I just studied for. So it was more than just theory. It was a culmination of deliberation, instruction, application, practice, execution, and reflection, all in that order. And as I was writing this talk, I began to realize that if you were to put those words in an acronym, it actually spells diaper. So in a way, we were trained, and it was made sure that we wouldn't make a mess of anything in a very contained environment, but with still giving the freedom to roam and explore our own ideas creatively. So in this class, we studied the game of Mora, which this game is a cognitively intensive math game that requires quick hands and even quicker processing abilities. So as you can see, it has a defense and an attack. If you really break it down to its rudimentary levels, your defense is to be unpredictable and also show bravado. You have to stand your ground, and that is sort of intimidating to the other. And although that can be an attack, it is also your defense. And the attack is to understand the patterns of the person you're playing against. So you're listening to their repetitions, you're listening to the tone of their voice, the pattern of action. And this game it dates back thousands of years to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And it's played mainly in places such as Italy, Spain, France, Croatia, Slovenia, and Malta. And it's very prevalent there. And when it's played, it can get pretty aggressive, extremely aggressive, and you wouldn't expect that from just a hand game. And as you can see, the way that you play, if you're playing against this person, you're immediately put in a place of, you feel belittled almost. This is an attacker. So that's part of the psychological aspect of this game. It's not just putting a number down, it's a whole character build of who you are as a person. So the way this game is played is it's in the form of a one-on-one duel. You have two players who are present, and while you're playing, the person is to present a number between 1 and 5 on one hand, and while simultaneously calling out the sum total of both you and your opponent's hand. So at the same time, if one person was to throw a 5 and one person was to throw a 3 and call an 8, then the person who calls an 8 is the one who scores a point. And if they both call the same number and it's correct, then it's a tie. And as a quick representation, 6, 9, neither of them get a point. Their fingers do not add up to 6 and 9. And then if they try it again and they both call 5 and their fingers both say 5, then no one scores a point. And then in this case, we get 7 and 6. And in this case, the person who yells out 6 is the one who scores for that round. And there are multiple facets of the brain acting at once while this is happening. So because of that, we decided to ask the question, what makes a person so successful at Mora? But before we go into that, I want to show you a quick demonstration of what we did in the classroom together. So, let's see. Oh, there's no volume. Well, as you can see, even without the volume, as they're calling out numbers, we're trying to figure out. You can see it goes on for a long period of time until someone gets it right. But then once you get that, your confidence is then boosted. So, And it was a great experiment to do as a class, and it brought us all together in a very fun way. So then we asked ourselves, what is it that makes a person successful at Mora? So we started looking at what are the factors that are involved in this game. And it turns out the factors were, we figured that they were working memory, recall, executive functioning, being able to withhold answers and produce answers, auditory information processing, listening and responding, calculation, and also purely prediction of being able to understand what that person's going to play. So from there, we decided to create a hypothesis of, and it stated, as playing Mora requires acute skills in attention, memory, speed of processing, and skills in randomly generating numbers, Mora could be used as an original and engaging method of predicting and modulating cognitive functions in a natural settings. So basically, can proficiency in Mora predict scores in cognitive tests and vice versa? Can we use this as a natural model to test people's cognitive abilities? So in order to do this, we devised a series of cognitive tests, which were the digit span, which works on working memory, random number generation, which is the RNG, which calculates to see how random someone's sequence can be as they're producing numbers in a series for 3 minutes, to see if it would be purely randomness that determined if someone was right or wrong, or a winner or a loser. We distributed the GNN, which is the guess the next number test, where we would give them a series of numbers, and we would give them one number at a time. And when we give them that number, they have to guess what the next number would probably be, to see if people were catching on to a pattern or if it was purely by chance. Another test was the PASAT, which is a paced auditory serial addition test. So in other words, you would hear a number on the screen and you would hear a second number. So it would be 8 and 2, and then you would have to add those up. So if you get 8 and 2, it would be 10, and then another number would come as 3. So you would add the last 2 numbers you heard. So 2 and 3 would be 5, and then you'd add 6. So it would be add 3 and 6, and that would be 9, and so on and so forth. So with these tests, we were able to gather 41 participants. 43 of them were females between the ages of 12 and 60. With a mean age of about 22.6 years. And the standard deviation was only about 8 years of age, so it was a pretty small gap, but it was enough to get a broad spectrum. And as a result of these tests that we conducted, upon completion, only the PASAT and the GNN showed to be significant factors of Mora to determine whether someone would be successful in Mora. So the p-values of these factors were less than 0.05, which is what made them significant. And the GNN, guessing the next number, was equal to 0.035, and the PASAT was equal to a 0.028. So it was a very high correlation factor. And after these tests and with these tests, what we correlated them with was their ability to play Mora. So after they performed those cognitive tests, they played a test against one of the students, one of us, which we would consider ourselves in this case the champions and the new testees, the naive people. So depending on what their score was against the champion would determine how well they did on the GNN or the PASAT. And in this case, subsequently, we found out that gender disparities that are talked about within this game were non-existent. So in these areas, this game is predominantly played by males and is thought to have male superiority.
I would say 99.99.
Yeah. Almost everyone is a male. And, but in this case, the difference was negligible between males and females when they played. So we were able to basically debunk that myth of male superiority within the game. Thank you. Thank you. And actually, they dominated. The females dominated in this case, for the most part.
Although, like, do you remember what so your champions, well, the champions were predominantly female, I would guess.
Yes.
But that doesn't matter, you're only looking at the naives.
We're only looking at the naives, yes. But in the class as a whole, when we played each other, the females did score more than the males as a class, yes. And our champion in the class was female, the one who won. So with this and with the data we collected, the way that I benefited from this Cree experience was I personally received higher perceived levels of self-efficacy. I had more confidence in myself. I felt like I was one step closer into entering the research field. So that helped me to really start to take charge in how I was going to approach the research field and really put my foot forward. And I had an in-depth introduction into the world of research, and the information and these skills stuck because it was all hands-on. It's sort of like riding a bike. Once you start doing it, that it stays with you, which is why I want to stress the experience part of this so much. So not only did it open my eyes in a relatable sense, it broke down these daunting walls that are posed by research, these daunting walls that we perceive ourselves that aren't actually there. But depending on where your background and where you grow up, these seem like almost impossible feats. So I really am, I can really appreciate how I was helped into ushering me into this field. So, and now, because of it, I'm now embarking on my own independent research study. And not only that, I'm also in a series of group papers with other faculty. But to focus on the independent study that I'm doing now, I was the recipient of the Presidential Research Award grant, and it's studying the cross-fertilization effects in heterogeneous academic curriculum. So I'm looking at whether a diverse semester, a diverse flowchart, aids in comprehension or heightened critical thinking skills than someone who has a very specialist-run track, one that is not very diverse. If someone is taking architecture and purely taking architecture courses versus someone who is taking architecture and taking some biology, some psychology, that reinforces their learning in their field. So I'm studying the institutionalized separation between majors within a university. And I don't think that we should move away from specialists. I think specialists are very necessary, and that's how we got here in the first place. But now with this abundance of information, we need people to bridge those gaps. We need people who are the liaisons between majors, people who think outside of the box along with people who think within the box, because it's very important. And with that, diversity breeds new invention, new engineering. For instance, there is a company that has started developing glass for skyscrapers by inlaying UV strands, because this person who was an architect also studied biology, and he figured that, well, birds don't fly into spider webs because they're able to detect UV strands. So if we start putting that in glass in skyscrapers, we will minimize the effect of birds running into these skyscrapers and eventually falling to their death. And since it's been installed, not a single bird has hit these buildings. So, but that's an idea that would have never come up if it wasn't for that mixture of information, that cross-fertilization of ideas and backgrounds. So, I want to get a better understanding of whether there is a need for more generalists and collaboration by analyzing the effects of heterogeneous and homogeneous academic semesters. And by analyzing these effects, I will gain a deeper understanding of the connections with academic achievements, cognitive functions, personal satisfaction, and perceived self-efficacy. And this is a two-part study because this study needs to be a longitudinal study. It's not something that you can just do in one semester. It takes some time. So The initial stages, the preliminary part of this study, which is currently in place, is purely how to identify a level of heterogeneity and homogeneity of a semester. In order to categorize whether a semester is diverse or non-diverse, and that has to be quantifiable. You need to put a numerical value to it in order to justify why this person's teachings is more diverse than someone else's, rather than objectively calling it diverse. So in order to do this, I started designing a curriculum dissimilarity chart, and the participants consisted of faculty members and undergraduate students and that are currently attending Lawrence Tech. The preliminaries part of this, we received 40 participants. 70 tests were taken because some people could take more than one test if they were architecture, engineering, or, and most courses include leadership, so most people took the leadership test as well. So some students took more than one. 60% of them were males, 75% were white, 10% were African American, 2.5% Hispanic, and these levels also equate to how many students are actually within a STEM program and how many of these demographics are not within a STEM program. And the ages range between 18 and 87 years of age because we had the broad spectrum of students and faculty. So when creating the curriculum dissimilarity scale, it was done on PsychoPy, which is a psychology coding software. But this way it makes it a little bit more hands-on, so you don't need as much coding experience. But so when working with this in PsychoPy, what I did was create a scale between 1 and 10 to find people's perceived differences between majors. And now their perceived differences might be objective or subjective. Once you average them out across an entire university, then you start to get some basis behind it. Then it starts to become more and more definitive, which is why we included faculty and students in this process. So this was able to create quantifiable data points and represented those data points by the Euclidean distances between classes. So this way we were able to see exactly what the numerical distance between a finance course and an industrial design course would be. And in this case, someone put a 2. This was before the test was changed. 1 was the most similar and 10 became the most dissimilar. So as I said, this was done by finding Euclidean distances, and in order to model this was done through multidimensional scaling, because it's impossible to collect this data and put it on a 2-dimensional graph. It doesn't work that way. There's too many variables, there's too many factors. So once I collected the data from all the students and faculty, we transferred this data from a spreadsheet to a graph using Excel Stat, which is an intuitive program that works within Excel. And the first group of data that we got was, so you can see there's highlighted in green starts with psychology and industrial engineering. And then the values next to that are all the different values that students have given. So the difference between psychology and industrial engineering was an 8, a 7, a 6, a 10, and a 9, which is pretty consistent between individuals. And once you average that out, that would give you a value of 8. So once we did this to every possible mixture of courses within LTU, then we were able to take this data and transfer it to another graph, which is a lot more legible and only contains the average values. So as you can see here, now you're able to go down the list and say, so this is management. How close is that to, say, a social science course? So you would go management all the way to social science, and it was a 5.5, or 9.5, sorry, it's a little blurry. And from this data, then we needed to figure out, okay, now what are the distances between this? Now that we have our values, how do these all interact together to give us the accurate distances as a 360? So We measured the distances in a represented space. We calculated the disparities using Excel stat, using the computer modeling program, and then that gave us the residual distances. And while this data might look very convoluted and confusing, we were able to sift through it again. And once we got our residual distances and we calculated all of these together, we were able to find the actual distances between courses from most similar to most dissimilar. And at the top of the list, the most similar courses was interior architecture design and architecture and design, which of course go hand in hand, just one being exterior and one being interior. And that was a level of 1, while the most dissimilar was biology and accounting, which to me makes a lot of sense. And around in the middle, we had architectural engineering and physics were pretty close. Biology and game art, that's where the differences started to really show. And the second most different was transportation design and accounting. So it's once you start going from completely different colleges that you start to see these disparities. So once we had these data points, we needed to figure out how to plot this on an X and Y axis. How are we going to find these points floating through space in relation to each other? So using Excel stat again, we were able to get this model, which gives us an X and Y value of each point and then plot it on a graph. And while we were looking at this, we had to figure out how to interpret this data. How was this data being grouped? How was not only the computer sorting it, but how were people on average grouping these courses? So after a couple of days of looking at it and really trying to understand how to translate this data, we started to figure out that it's broken up into 4 quadrants. Ooh, the colors are kind of off on this projector, but over here is the blue quadrant, which we call the analytic courses, which were computer science, and all engineering was over here. And in the bottom right was social science and business management, which was all business management courses, accounting, psychology courses, language and literature. And then over here in the top right were all our science-based courses, such as physics, chemistry, biomedical engineering. And then in the bottom right was all of our design courses, such as architecture, game art, interior architecture. And then right here, almost dead center, is architectural engineering, which kind of hosts everything. So from there, we started to realize that, well, this curricular dissimilarity scale actually works. It is grouping these courses in a very, in an understandable manner, in a way that we can translate and actually relate it to what we see on a campus. Because it was almost breaking it up purely in their domains of the engineering domain, the science domain, the architecture domain. So it was an effective way of understanding and quantifying the Euclidean distances between classes. And this data will become more and more reliable as we include more and more subjects to it. So the next stages of this test will occur next semester, where I will distribute this version of the test to basically everyone on campus, so that we get an accurate representation of where these differences lie, and the more data points we get, the more fine-tuned these points end up on our X and Y axis. And thus cementing the effectiveness of this scales allow for this research to continue to the next stage. So once that part is complete, then the next incoming freshman class will get a series of cognitive tests to test their abilities coming into the semester, and then they will get this test again towards the end of the semester to see if there was any different improvements or differences towards the end. And some of these classes have CRE implemented now, and some of these classes don't, which is another reason why a longitudinal study is necessary, because we need to see if there is a change in how these students are performing as CRE courses are implemented into these programs. So, and we won't just be testing freshmen, we'll also be testing sophomores, juniors, and seniors to see what the difference is. And if we can, we want to get a hold of some alumni to see what their levels of confidence were graduating, to see if they felt a difference, to see how if they scored better in these courses, was it easier for them to land a job? Did they have a better time? Did they feel more confident? Did they feel like they were actually ready to perform these tasks? So in analyzing the possible effects of heterogeneity and homogeneity curriculum, we're able to get a better understanding of what kind of minds we're forming and what kind of minds are receptive to the information that we're giving and what they want in general. So I'm really excited to see what this data holds. And that being said, I'm very active in my academics now, to the point where, in a way that I could only dream of 2 years ago. I never thought I'd be so enveloped into the research field as I am now, especially within STEM. So considering how involved and confident I am in the research community now, I would argue that CRE helped me with that final push that I needed to put me in the right direction into accelerating my educational experience at LTU. So it is important that I feel it's important that students receive experience within their education. In order to learn, it's not enough just to be told how to do it. Practicing and experience with that information is required to develop those skills and really master and hone them and feel confident enough to apply them in real-world settings. So I feel that information availability is important. However, it is not enough in the university. You will always need that experiential availability as well. So it all starts with the opportunity to have both information and experience at your fingertips, the true marriage of theory and practice. And with that, I am excited to be here still, and I am honored to have this opportunity. Thank you. So, are there any questions, or yes?
So I'm just kind of interested in the data that you're gathering about these pairs of courses or the differences. Are you, I don't know if you're looking within your data at how sort of, I would imagine that different people would have very different responses potentially to that, and how to sort of trying to figure out if there are certain maybe biases or even just like how reliable, maybe not reliable something, but like how reproducible are those, in the sense that, occasionally you might find someone who does put biology and accounting together, right?
Yeah.
And so what's that?
Well, we're also looking in this right here. I can't zoom in. But we're keeping it in category of which students are answering these questions. So we're keeping a constant of, this is how psychology students feel about their relationship between psychology and fine arts. This is how people within biology feel about their relationship between biology and architecture. So this way we get an idea of who is answering these questions and how they're doing it, so that it's not as random as it could be, and we're omitting some data that doesn't fit in. If the discrepancy is like 9 points away from everyone else, then that data will be omitted.
If I can add something about this. Now there are many fields in perception in which human reaction, which is completely crucial, is very difficult to take without asking to express an opinion. For example, smell perception, right? In terms of chemicals, smell, for example, coffee is the mix of 100 different substances, right? But we have a precise sensation of what the smell of coffee is and how distant it is from strawberry, right? This thing is only, until now in science, there is no better way than multidimensional scaling. It was applied to smell perception, also to the difference between timbres between instruments. For example, piano and guitar and trumpet. So there are many dimensions that are involved in that. And so you ask just the Euclidean distance between things, and then just as a miracle, factors will emerge from the computer analysis, right? This is exactly, he applied, what he did was to apply multidimensional scaling to a very complex problem, like you're mentioning. There is no perfect solution, but this is actually the feelings, and a way to measure how dispersive is the answer is that just the standard deviation. If you have enormous variations, it means that in that particular relationship, there is no very big agreement between people.
Yes?
What makes a unit Euclidean?
It's the calculated average of perceived distances.
What would a non-Euclidean unit look like? That's a good question. I have Franco can answer that one.
I will be very dry in this, in the sense now, this is just a method, and I know that there is a metaphysical or metaphorical implication, but
Don't we all
here we have two elements. For example, strawberry and lemon, and you as a single person, you assign a distance value, which is, I don't know, 2. I assign a distance that is 4, and then the average is 3 with a standard deviation of 1. This is why it's Euclidean. It's a way of expressing distances. Now, the multidimensional scaling, actually, it's more complex, because now when you have more than 3 dimensions, which is totally plausible, then it's very difficult to represent in an Euclidean space. So, in a way, I agree. And also the method agrees that it's not very Euclidean, but in order to get to the complexity of the problem, you still have to assign Euclidean distances.
So I'm wrong in thinking about Euclidean as 2-dimensional. It's okay to say it.
No, I think that's
Yes,
still-
I'm wrong. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, between the two pairs is the single evaluation, yes, is 2-dimensional. The single evaluation of the distance.
Mhm. Yes?
So I was wondering what your experiences, or even what you perceived other people's experiences were in pre-courses with collaboration, because I know collaboration is something that can be both positive and negative. So what kind of are the positive and negative aspects of your experience? And I'm not asking you to throw Franco under the bus, but...
Well, I would say that the most positive experience would be when my CRE course involves students within other majors as well. So it's when we had a majority of psychology majors, however, we had some computer science and engineering majors as well. So when we were working on tests, we were able to have someone work on the coding, someone else work on actually constructing the device, and someone else working on distribution and making sure that it is comprehensible and understandable. So we were able to work as a unit, as a collective. And that was the most effective part of it, was that we weren't just saturated with students within our own major while conducting this research. We actually had to communicate with each other and find out how to come to these solutions together. Yeah. Yes?
Just looking at your data, I see a few holes, like it seems as though students could maybe like skip a question, or if they weren't part of that course, they just didn't answer. Is there some limiting factor that kind of made it so that some people just didn't have input?
We did include an option if they didn't feel comfortable like conducting or perceiving that distance, so we would omit it after the fact. However, it would also be substituted by someone from the opposite major explaining the same distance. So someone from psychology saying that the distance between psychology and game art is 2, and then someone from game art saying that the difference between game art and psychology is 5. So we would get the counter number for that. And if someone doesn't feel like they can accurately represent that distance, then we won't use that data, because we want to use data from people that are able to really be honest with themselves and say that they understand both sides of these courses and they can give an accurate representation of how they stand. Yes?
It would be interesting to know if students from particular majors had a more or less exaggerated sense of the distance between themselves.
100% with game art and physics.
My intuition would tell me the arts and science majors would think of things as being much closer together.
Mm-hmm.
and that the more STEM engineering people would have a greater sense of the distance between them?
So with this preliminary test, we did realize that game art students would consider physics to be 2 in terms of similarity, so extremely similar.
Makes sense because you're always playing with physics when
Yeah.
you're designing this game.
But students in physics would say that it's a 9. So
Very interesting to
Yeah.
see the perceptual bubbles that we all live in.
yeah.
Towards this question of interdisciplinary.
And actually, as a follow-up, you would also be keen to do that, the different stages the students.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because as a generalization, I think that the less you know about something, the more you think you know about it.
Yeah.
So the more you know about the field, you might be able to see those differences.
Yeah.
So testing the same people in another, again,
Exactly.
next year about the distances, yes.
Major, like test those game art and physics majors as freshmen, and then test them again as seniors.
Yeah, because we did also separate the data points from answers given by freshmen, answers given by sophomores, juniors, and seniors. But we haven't done it as a longitudinal standpoint of the same person asking within a couple different semesters. So that would be really interesting as well. And that's something I would look into now, definitely. Yes?
What would be the application of this research? Overall influence in terms of improving the experience of students?
The application, or what I would hope for, is more of one of 2 things. Either the introduction of multidisciplinary labs of students collaborating together, or a rise in interdisciplinary study majors, of being able to bring 2 majors together. Because right now we don't really have that option in most universities, and we don't have that here. You have to select one or the other, and we do not have any independent fields to research in. So I would say that bringing that real-world aspect of collaboration between majors is what I would be looking forward to in this.
How does this study, though, promote that?
Oh, it would show whether there is a need or not for it. Whether the students that are doing better when they're working in a cross-cultural aspect in terms of courses are actually succeeding more when they're able to bring those courses together versus the students that are doing better as a specialist. Because I think we'll see answers that justify both aspects. Because some people are more comfortable being a specialist, but there is the side that is underrepresented of the side of people that actually want to merge things together and they feel like they're boxed in certain majors. So if we start to see that some certain students feel like they're better prepared for the world or they're doing better because of their cross-fertilization, then it gives rise to a justification of why we need to start looking more into that concept. So, yes.
So
Yes.
related to that, and I think having advised many students over the years, I definitely see some students who prefer to be a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like I'm going to take all X type of courses this semester and it's going to be great. Or I see some students who are more open to having a mix of classes. Are you going to ask the students in the survey, because I would think that, so potentially you could find that for some students, like you said, being a specialist is going to be produce the most gains for them.
Yes.
But other students might have a very, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So is there a way to sort of at least ask about their openness to the idea?
We do ask
or
a, we do provide a demographics questionnaire that actually was not one of the questions on it, but when this test is distributed to everyone, then that is something that we would include, which is whether they feel more comfortable within a specialist setting or if they feel more comfortable across many topics, and whether that's how they see themselves. So yeah, that way we can get an idea of the people, if the people who feel more comfortable actually do better in that field.
I think you might miss, if you put all the data in accurately,
Yes.
I think you could miss some meaningful trends.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
I think that's a very good point.
I think it's a great suggestion because probably if you average everything together, maybe there is no effect. But maybe it's just that putting together 2 completely different populations. People that prefer a specialization in one semester, so I want to reinforce the physics concepts with mathematics concepts, and other people that need to just a break from certain fields in order to get like a more vast, I don't know,
point of view on knowledge. I don't know. And this will favor cross-fertilization, but not probably, possibly not in everybody.
Yeah, but it gives
So
us
this
something
is
to
actually
go
an
off of.
important aspect for advising, like you were saying.
I wonder what this would be. My gut feeling, I've been here for 13 years, is that we tend to favor, just as a university, specialists. I think we attract people who have that. And when you're really interesting to try and look, once you get maybe to the point to collaborate with like a traditional liberal arts college, where that more well-rounded, you know what I mean?
Just to give an example now, a research that a friend of mine is doing and asking for collaboration to LTU, and he's a high school professor in Sardinia, is like a genius computer scientist. And so he is always experimenting with the pedagogical ideas, and what he did is just crazy. He involved a professor of literature teaching in a class here, and he's teaching in this class. Every 10 minutes they switch classes, not joking. And they switched that, and then they tested the retention of the arguments. And we know that our attention will drop severely down if you are always sustaining attention for 40 minutes. So every 10 minutes they switch, and they have better results. Literature and mathematics, right? It's really completely experimental, but I think it's very interesting.
Well, this kind of is following the same line, but I'm also reminded of, I think it's on our standard course evaluation, but it may also be the midterm one I give, which is the relevance question, right? How is this relevant for my major? How is this relevant for my general education person? And as someone who teaches literature here, they tend to be ranked pretty low, right? The courses that I teach. But what you're asking, so I would want to know the students' perceived relevance of, if there's a way that you're sort of seeing their perceived relevance of the particular course. I don't know if this fits within the paradigm of the way you're asking the questions, but that it kind of ties into the generalist, specialist, mindset. But then as another application I'm thinking of here, what you're doing is talking about curricular experiences as a whole. And the problem with that question on the course evaluation is it isolates that particular subject matter, when actually what you're suggesting is maybe we should be thinking about the undergraduate curriculum as its sort of interactive parts. I just think that might be interesting rhetorically as a faculty and as a university to communicate that to the students, instead of saying, this course is relevant for you. Maybe if you isolate that course, it might not feel very relevant. But this subject matter in the sort of ecosystem of your education this semester is very relevant or very interesting. I don't know, just sort of speculating.
So kind of going from, instead of going specifically on the course, but the subject matter as a whole.
And then thinking the subject matter within the system that is that semester of coursework or that year of coursework, right?
Yes, that is something I would like to go into. I just know that doing that and getting specifically into the courses within a subject, the amount of data points grows exponentially. So
it's already very difficult.
Yes.
This is a big difficulty that emerged from the questions before. Why do you have holes in there? Because not everybody's ready to answer questions, and everybody's very busy. So the students went under the direction of Xamaka, the students of Experiential Psychology Lab, I believe. They went around the university asking for tests. Many people answered, 40 people. But still, we don't have a very large representation of what the answers are, right? And also, another follow-up to this research would be to extend the same and see if in other universities we have the same feelings. For example, compare technical universities like Lawrence Tech with other universities that are different. And so maybe the difference between fields are perceived in a different way. But it's actually a very important metaphorical instrument to go into the directions like Jason was saying before. I think it's a wonderful suggestion. How do we perceive the distance between ourselves and others is sometimes more important than what is the actual distance. What is the actual thing is us perceiving the possibility and the impossibility of reaching competence in other fields or integrating competencies.
And that's also true on outcomes or consequences. The people who are most resistant to the experience might actually get the greatest outcomes. They might not perceive it as their outcomes. So if you're comfortable in all NASA, and we tell you, you got to take some poetry and some this and some that, you may go kicking and screaming, and you may report really negatively if I ask you what your perception of it is. But there should be some objective, independent way to measure what your actual progress is. Because if you tell me I got to take science, as a liberal arts student, I'm like, yeah, no problem. Science, math, I can mix it all together. I have very low anxiety, but I might get very little of the reward. That is the marginal gain, because I'm already there psychologically.
Right.
I don't have that barrier to walk into an accounting class and think, this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
So there's nothing really for me to benefit from, versus the people who are most resistant might actually be getting the most pedagogically. I don't know how you measure that.
And you might self-report that it's rewarding to you, as opposed to someone who's resistant who self-reports that it's not rewarding or beneficial, but
I agree. I agree.
The best students, for example, are the most, this is emerging 5-7 years of surveys. The best students are the most resistant to teamwork.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because why? Because they always do the work, right? They don't want to work for hours.
Essentially, was in tears last night over that.
So yeah, sometimes the perception is.
Well, one way around that might be to calculate what is happening at the beginning of the semester versus the end, and not only how they perceive their advancements, but also what their grades reflect in that course, and how the professor might rate that student. That actually might be a good data point to collect, is how this professor would actually rate the student's progress in the course as well. Yes?
So the original question that informed your research was, does a diverse flowchart encourage critical thinking? Right. So I'm wondering, how are you defining critical thinking, and how are you measuring that as getting better or getting worse, or does it encourage or does it not encourage?
There are a series of standardized critical thinking cognitive skills tests. Some of them involved critical reasoning, working memory, and with that, we're looking at their self-efficacy, so their ability to feel like, seeing if it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that they are doing better in these courses. I can't remember the name of the studies right now, but there are 3 cognitive tests standardized that have been distributed around campuses to study the level of achievements in students after particular courses. And those were the tests that I was going to go off of. Because they're fun, typically they're used by developmental psychologists to see someone's change in development over time, to see if it's actually a gain or a loss, or if it's sustained.
Yeah, this is the second phase, right? Now he is trying to have the instrument. We know what the distance is, right? Yeah. When with distance are set with an acceptable level of rigor, let's say, robustness, then you can move to phase 2, which is how students differ in according to their level of heterogeneity. Now, right? So the first is establish what the heterogeneity means, right? And this is all this work about these numbers. Then when this is established, you can test them in whatever way you like. And creativity is definitely one important aspect. And there are, for example, divergent thinking tests. Just to give you an example of one of the monumental questions in this kind of test is try to find as many uses of a brick that you can. Right? And they say to throw the brick on the face of your how do you say
Professor.
I would say the mother of your wife. What is the name? Mother-in-law. This is a typical use. Mother-in-law weapon. Yeah, exactly. But you find 10, and there is a prize. One for the number, and a separate prize for the original response, which is the less shared response with others. That's it. Right. You have 100 people, and this is the uniqueness of the response. So it's this is one of the techniques that's used. But this is second phase. Yes. A brief. Perfect.
Yes?
So this presentation was nice because well, do you mind if I ask you a slightly more personal question?
Sure.
So you talked about being a first generation researcher, you talked about you pursue self-efficacy. Could you harken back to like before you started on this journey and when you were saying, I'm not going to be that, I can't be a researcher. And what were the things that you saw as being like most unattainable that now you found you were actually able to attain them like easier than you thought? I know that the question's not very well formulated, but I want you to think about Euclidean distances between the gap, like the biggest gap that you, the biggest gap that you closed. You
Right.
know what I mean? And
Right.
so like, because we're really interested in this question as faculty, how to like help students close those gaps.
Well, I would say that the biggest gap I closed was my level of confidence in myself to actually be a contributing factor into the research field. That was the gap that I closed. Because when I was first interested in, or I've always been interested in the science field. That's always something that interested me, but it wasn't something that people were necessarily interested in within my environment. Now, I think there are some pre-genetic dispositions within my family because, for instance, my stepbrother went through the political field and became a very well-known politician. But for me, I wanted to explore the science field, but when looking at the level of research that people are doing at this point, like for instance, Ed Boyden at MIT is working on microscopy studies of how to look at the brain, which he included these polymers that expand the brain 10 times its size so that you don't have to use a standard microscope in order to view it. So when looking at that, I'm originally like, this guy is like the Albert Einstein of today, and that level is, I don't think I can achieve that. That level of, I guess, diving into a study full-heartedly and understanding what you're getting, and because when I see people that are accomplishing that, immediately I think, well, this person was pushed by their family. This person was already kind of had an idea of what they were doing from a young age. It was already ingrained in them. This person might have more opportunities to present that idea. So in coming here and realizing that the opportunities were very personable and relatable and that it is something that I could be included in, then that's when I started to realize that I need to start picking my feet up. I can gain some traction here. I need to start just pushing myself towards it because I was creating these walls in my own head about why I couldn't do it. And so really I just needed that push into, I'm already in it. This is happening now and it's happening around me and I have the opportunity. All I have to do is just sign up or put my best foot forward. Yeah.
Because I remember we met
Yeah.
and were talking, and you were still an architect.
I was still in architecture.
And
Yeah.
I'm really interested in receiving and what we call it, like how walls affect how people feel. And I was like, you need to go talk to them. You're already asking research questions. I was like, I think, because you were like, I think I'm drawn to science.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, you sound like. So you were on, but I remember you saying you were like, I don't know.
Yeah, because I was my own worst enemy, and like I had the ideas. I knew that I had good levels of intelligence. The application of it, the actual going out and making those paths available for me is what held me up. Even though all those paths were available, but you tend to be your own worst enemy occasionally. I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you for having me here.